Okay, step two in getting your composting business up and running is getting to know the regulations involved. Now, you've already done some market research in your area and you feel confident that there is a market for that service and those products that are produced. Now it's time to begin to familiarize yourself with the regulations that will cover a composting facility. Now, at first, you might look at all this and it seems incomprehensible, but it really isn't too bad. You do not need to read all of this stuff. Now, notice here, this number, 0400-11-01-0.11, this 0.11, this refers to requirements for compost and composting facilities. This is the section that you're really going to need to understand. This one, of course, is for Tennessee, but for whatever state or territory you're in, there will be something comparable. Now, you should know that as you go through the section on compost and composting facilities, it will reference a few of the other sections, so you will have to look at some of the other ones a little bit, maybe 0.02 that describes the permitting process itself, certainly 0.03 that describes the requirements for financial assurance. Financial assurance is basically money that's set aside that you'll have to arrange for, maybe in the form of a surety bond through an insurance company. That's what I did. So the state has money available to it if you just disappear and they have a mess to clean up. So that will be a cost to you and another step for you to do. So just be aware of that. So we're going to spend our time at, of course, 0.11, which is the requirements for compost and composting facilities. Okay, let's skip ahead to section 11, which is for the compost and composting facilities. I happen to know that that's all the way on page 132. I'm actually going to come up here to this little box, 132. Good. Now, as we're coming down to this page, you'll notice every page at the top begins with whatever section it's on. So this last little bit here is of section 10. In our section 11 or 0.11, it begins on this page, requirements for compost and composting facilities. Now again, not reading through all of this, we can see that it's already referring to other rules like I had mentioned, so you can find those. But let's skip down here to a few exemptions that might be of interest to you. Let's see here. At the top of this next page, notice it says that any composting facility with a throughput of less than 400 cubic yards of type 1 feedstock during any calendar year. What it was saying here is that kind of facility is not subject to the requirement to have a permit. So you don't need a permit, right? Now you say, okay, well, that's great. What is type 1 feedstock? Type 1 feedstock, as it explains, oddly enough, down here, includes basically the kinds of things that we might call green waste, separated yard trimmings, woody material, and so forth. Let's say you're like me and you're interested in composting food scraps. That's referred to a little bit later here in type 2. Okay, type 2 feedstocks include food processing residuals and so forth. Now, if you're doing that, and maybe you're just getting started, you're doing a proof of concept facility, if you accept, and here I'll highlight it here, if you have a throughput of less than 50 cubic yards of that feedstock in a calendar year, you don't need a permit. So it is a way for you to get started. the problem you might imagine is that if you're doing that and you see, yes, I've got a business here, I really need to ramp this up, well, then you are going to have to go through the permitting process. And that process, um, it's not only complicated, but it's lengthy. You have public notice periods and things like that. It could easily take a year or so. So if you're sure you're going to do it, you might as well go ahead and get the permit at the outset so you don't get hung up. Um, okay, so yeah, let's talk about type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 feedstocks refers to the kind of material that you're composting, right? The same with type 2 feedstocks. It's a kind of material, or type 3 feedstocks, right? If your facility and you only do type 1, you would be a tier 1 facility. So that means no food scraps, just crop waste and things like that. Tier 2 facility like mine, you can do green waste, but you can also do food scraps, food residuals. Tier 3 is not what I do, but if you are a tier 3 composting facility, you can do type 3 feedstocks, which now we get into things like mixed solid waste, sewage sludge, biosolids, those kinds of things. Now, whatever tier you're going to go for, this entire section of regulations is important. But like I say, we're not going to go through them all. We're going to focus on those that affect the next step, our site selection. So let's scroll down a little bit. Okay, and you can see things like endangered species. There's all kinds of things you're going to read about. But as far as picking a location, let's take a look at this one here. Location in floodplains. While you're looking at sites, many properties might look promising, but on closer inspection are not. And so what we're going to talk about today will help, like I said, with the next step, help you eliminate and not waste your time on properties that ultimately you won't be able to use. So if your property of interest is in a floodplain, you can't use it. If part of the property is in a floodplain, it's okay as long as the facility itself is not. And again, this is one of the many times that you would go back to one of those other sections of the regulations to educate yourself on that. Likewise, if there are wetlands on the property, it's okay if it's on the property, but not where the facility will actually be doing construction and then operating. Now, this is the one that I'm most interested in today, the buffer zone standards. Okay, for siting a new facility, there are a few buffer zones that you must adhere to that, again, if you're not aware of these, you might waste your time, or worse, you might enter into a contract to buy a property that is simply not appropriate for a composting facility. And for that, we are going to go and take a look at this other section here, 0.04. Okay, and yeah, this section, like the other two that I was talking about, are in 0.04, but this is subparagraph 3A, which I happen to know from preparing is on page 76, so we don't have to spend forever looking for it. Okay, here we go. There's subparagraph 3, section A. Now, when you locate this information in whatever regulation you're looking at for your state or territory, I would like you now to write these numbers down. Again, not for me, not for Tennessee, but for wherever you are, because these are the numbers that you will use when you're looking at different properties online, which I'll show you an example of in the next step, the site selection process. So what it's saying is that you're, in this case, a compost facility must be located, designed, constructed, operated, and maintained so that it says the fill areas, right? Because they're thinking here of a landfill, but we can understand that they're talking about the food scrap reception areas and initial processing areas are at a minimum, at a minimum, and these are the important numbers, 100 feet from all property lines. This is very important and affected some of the properties I was looking at. 500 feet from all residences, okay? Unless, yes, the owner agrees in writing to a shorter distance, but, fat chance on that. This is also important. You'll have to determine, and this might take some legwork on your part, at least at a minimum 500 feet from all wells determined to be down gradient and used as a source of drinking water by humans or livestock. So any well, that's down gradient, so downhill basically, of your reception area, of your initial processing area, it's got to be more than 500 feet away. And this is the most important number. It was for me. In East Tennessee, of course, we have a lot of creeks and rivers and lakes, at least 200 feet from the normal boundaries of springs, streams, lakes. So basically any body of water, except a wet weather conveyance. That means it's only flowing right after a rainstorm, say, nor to bodies of water constructed and designed to be part of the facility. Obviously, if you're making retention ponds, it's different. So you need to be aware. You've got a nice property. It seems to be out of the way. It's got good access, but there's a creek running through it. Well, any reception and processing area needs to be 200 feet from that creek, and that is going to eat up a lot of the area of your property. And then also, no constructed appurtenances, within 50 feet of the property line. Of course, that doesn't include items that are already there when you acquire the property. So yeah, find this information for your state or territory, write it down, and use it when using Google Earth or another property viewer you're evaluating properties. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So back in the composting section here. Okay, there, yeah. Buffer zone standards, that's what we were just looking at. Now, if we continue on, again, not reading through it all, you've got a section on operational standards. You can imagine we've got fire safety, communication, dust control. Your regulating agency is wanting to protect the public from from water contamination, but also nuisances like dust and birds and things like that. Earlier I mentioned the financial assurance, right? And it tells you to go take a look at this other rule. We're not going to do that, but you'll need to do that, I'm sure. And coming on down, there are some things I wanted to point out. Okay, closure. Okay, yeah. Now, when you get to the facility design and operating standards, notice that here again, you're going to have some different information depending on what kind of feedstocks you're using, right? This first section deals with tier 1, so basically green waste, crop residues, that kind of thing. Talking about the surfaces, right? Talking about the water table, right? Unless you have, and for some things you're going to need asphalt or concrete. It's going to talk about the minimum average temperature, right? Tier 2 is going to have a very similar but a slightly more strict section on this, especially regarding the surface and the it'll have the same temperature requirements. And then tier 3, again, a little more strict. Okay, then you're going to have a section, or I don't know what order, but of course you got a section on testing. Notice tier 1 doesn't need to worry about it. Tier 2 and tier 3 does. It tells you how often you need to do it per quarter. And somewhere in here it says that if everything's fine, you can petition for not having to do it every single quarter, and I did that. And some of the things it'll test for, you can imagine, we've got stability, and here it's looking for pathogens. It wants to make sure that your product won't have pathogens that would be dangerous to the public. And heavy metals, never a problem for me. I can imagine if you're a tier 3 facility dealing with biosolids and sludge that you would have trouble with this. But for me, food scraps, leaves, things like that, I don't have to worry about that. I have to test for it, but it's never been a problem. You're going to have to keep records. It'll tell you how and what they want. Now, this is important too. The design and construction plans, and they required that I have a licensed engineer draw them up. So of course that's a fair amount of money out the door. And there are two general kinds of plans: the master plan, which is not that detailed, but it's got some of the like the 2,000 foot view of it, and then the design plans, which is more detailed. That basically shows all the things you'll use to produce your product. Now, one thing that you don't need to do now, but as you're getting your permit, you will need to do is you'll have to have a narrative description of the facility, and in that, this is kind of lengthy, but all of these sections, all of these paragraphs and statements, you'll have to write a description of how you're going to stay in compliance with it. Okay, and then they'll probably require you to have an annual report. This tells what you need to have in that report, and that's it. Now notice here at the end, Tennessee code annotated. This is just some information about why they have the authority to ask this, and then it moves on to the next section. So, like I say, not reading all of this, the things that I highlighted will help you with the next section, which is how to select a site. And I'll refer back to these. And I do want to say that you're going to want to make contact with your regulators now. Let them know your plans as they currently exist. Ask any questions that you have, and ask if there are other regulations or requirements or standards that you don't know about. Okay? All right, I'll see you in the next step.